Hi there. Welcome to today's episode of BMSC Live. We're here in Bamfield, British Columbia, on the west coast of Vancouver Island, in the traditional territory of the Huu-ay-aht First Nation. My name is Kelly, and I'm an educator here at the Bamfield Marine Sciences Centre, or BMSC for short. We are a not for profit registered Canadian charity and a shared campus of 5 different universities. These are the University of Victoria, University of British Columbia, Simon Fraser University, the University of Alberta, and the University of Calgary. So all 5 of them have a hand in our operation. We host researchers here. We've been doing this for almost 50 years. They come from all over the world to do their studies here in Bamfield. We also run 4 credit university courses as well as field trips for school groups. This show is brought to you today mostly through funding from an organization called NSERC Promo Science. They've been supporting our education programs for many years now, and without their support, this show would not be possible. So big thank you to NSERC Promo Science for making this possible. Now, I'm going to introduce you to my team here today in just a moment, but first I want to introduce you to our environment. We're here on the Bamfield docks. Let me show you our surroundings for a second. This is the community of Bamfield. Here we are, Bamfield Inlet, and we're going to be taking a look at some of the creatures that live under the water here in Bamfield Inlet in what's called the subtidal zone, exploring the creatures that live permanently underwater. We have a couple different ways that we can do this here today, and I'll show that to you in just a moment. The subtidal zone is something that you probably don't get to visit very often unless you're a scuba diver, or maybe you're just really good at diving and holding your breath, but otherwise you don't get to see these creatures every day. And I'd love it if you guys could make a prediction of what we might see today. So the way this works, if you're on Zoom, you can use the comments, the chat function to make a comment, and I'll answer your comment throughout the show. Or if you're on YouTube, you can just use the comment function there to type in your answers. Or if you think of any questions throughout the show, you can ask me and I'll get back to those as we go along. So your first question here today is, what creatures do you think we might see under the docks here at BMSC? And we'll take a look in just a moment to see if you make the right prediction. While you're thinking about that, I'll introduce my teammates to you here today. So first of all, we have Olivia here on the dock with me today. She's going to be our underwater videographer, and she's got a camera here that we'll be using to look at some of the creatures just under the surface here today. We also have another teammate. He's on the boat, but I don't think you can see him from this angle. His name is Phil. And Phil is our technology expert, so he's making sure that behind the scenes, all of the technology is running smoothly for us. I'm going to hand things over to Phil for just a moment.
Thanks, Kelly. Hi, everybody. So this is where I will show you all whereabouts we are in the world in comparison to where you are. We like to pop up a bit of Google Earth here. So you can see here we have North America, and we are on Vancouver Island, the west coast of Canada here. And we'll just slowly zoom in to where we're at. So this large body of water here is called Barkley Sound, filled with islands and channels. Ucluelet's up there if you've been to Ucluelet or heard of it, and Bamfield is down here, and the Science Center is right on this point of land. Right here, we have our main building, and we are on the dock today. So just down the hill on this dock here, this is our north dock of the Bamfield Marine Science Center. So there you have it. Back to you, Kelly.
Great, thanks, Phil. All right, we're going to get started and begin examining some of the creatures here under the dock. The first ones that we'll be looking at have been suspended under the water. They're growing on ropes that we hung off the dock a couple of years ago. They started out as just bare ropes. There was nothing on them. But over time, as the years went on, animals started to colonize and start living on these ropes. But because they're just ropes, we can actually pick them up and pull them out of the water in order for you guys to get a chance to see them. The animals animals that are on the ropes may look a little bit different than when they're underwater, and I'll help to explain what we're seeing. Now, I noticed a few comments started to come in about animals you thought we might encounter here today. I saw somebody predicted starfish, and that's probably an animal that we will see. I also saw Metridium anemones, which is a type of anemones that, again, they're very common underneath the docks, and I bet we can find some of those here today. Were there any other comments that came through on YouTube, Phil?
Yeah, so we have some people thinking, so yeah, the anemones were mentioned. Claire said maybe an octopus, and Michaela
Oh,
said
I
perhaps
hope so.
some starfish.
Claire and Michaela, I hope you guys are right, because I would love to see those creatures here today. Great. Well, let's have a look. I'm going to show you what Olivia's been doing in the background. Here she is. We're going to come a little bit closer to her. Olivia has pulled up one of these ropes from underneath the dock, and now we can start to examine some of the animals living on here. And like I said, they look a little bit weird, don't they? They are not quite what you would imagine for these animals. So does anybody know what on earth we're actually looking at? Oh, we have our very first invertebrate. What is in Olivia's hand? Does anybody know? It's a little bit squished looking, but it's still very much alive. Dylan, you've got the answer. It is a starfish. This is called an ochre star. This one happens to be of the purple variety, but they also come in orange as well. And so that one happened to just be attached very nicely right to the bottom of our line. Now, what is it sitting on top of? What is that orange or brown colored blob that Olivia's touching right now? Okay, oh, it looks squishy. Is it squishy? It's very squishy, kind of slimy looking. And it doesn't look like an animal, does it? But in fact, it is. There's another one just to the side. There's a second one right beside it. These are those anemones that you guys were predicting. But I know it doesn't look like an anemone right now, does it? What happens when they're out in the air? They retract all their tentacles. They kind of close up into a little ball because they don't really enjoy being up in the air environment right now, like what we've done to them. So as soon as we put them back in the water, which we'll do in just a moment, they'll actually recover from this experience, and they'll start to put their tentacles back out, and we'll get a look at them a little bit later on to see what they really look like in their natural environment. Let's take a look at the next part of the rope here. What are these things sticking out? Olivia's pointing at one right now. Oh, did you guys see that? It just retracted down inside of that tube of some sort. What kind of creature could this possibly be? Let me know in the comments. Yes, I see a type of worm in the comments. Are there any other comments, Phil, coming through?
Nope, worm is the first guess we have right now.
Well, it turns out that worm is the correct guess. This is a tube worm, or rather, this is a clump of many tube worms here together. And when Olivia touched it earlier, it retracted inside of its tube. That's a great mechanism for avoiding predators. It thinks that Olivia is trying to eat them right now. There goes another one. And so the worm actually makes the tube itself. It's kind of papery feeling, or it's almost like touching a straw, where you can still sort of bend the straw. See, it's flexible, but it's still enough protection for the worm to live inside and be safe in there. So that's kind of the life of the tube worm. And again, we'll be able to see these animals in just a little while longer, where they'll look a whole lot better once they're under the water. So let's actually get these animals back into the ocean. We'll put them back where they came from. We have another line that we'll pull up so that you guys can see them, and maybe we'll get to see a couple of different kinds of animals. So Olivia's going to get that pulled up for us, and we'll have a look at the second one in just a moment here. Hopefully we'll see some different creatures. But from your predictions already, we've seen those plumose anemones, we've seen starfish, one starfish already, and now let's see what else we can find. All right, Olivia's got this one up out of the water here. Excellent. What are these colorful things? There's a lot of white and orange showing on this one. We see some of the tube worms again, like we saw earlier, but there's a lot of weird, gooey looking things. Does anyone know what that is? What a strange thing. I'll give you a hint. It's actually an animal, or rather, it's a colony of animals all living together here. Any ideas? Oh, somebody says, Stacy says it looks like snot. And you know what, Stacy, you're absolutely right. It really doesn't look very appetizing, does it? But it's not snot. It's not some version of ocean snot. This is actually a group of animals. It's a colony of animals. The white and the orange, they're different species. They're called tunicates, or also sometimes sea squirts is their name. Now, what's even weirder about these, I know they look like blobs and they can't possibly be animals, but even crazier is they're actually kind of related to humans. These are like our very distant cousins down here, and they're just growing on these lines and ropes underwater, attaching to whatever might be there. So you're probably wondering, well, how could that be possible? How could these even be remotely related to us? And it actually has to do with when they're small little babies. Just like human babies at one point were not much more than a ball of cells that slowly are developing. And these guys do the same thing. They almost at some point in their life look like little tadpoles. They can actually swim around just like a tadpole, but then they go through a complete metamorphosis and they change their body shape and then they turn into these blobs. It's so weird. There's an even weirder one right behind us here. Let's have a look at this one. Olivia described this yesterday as looking like macaroni and cheese, which is kind of appropriate, but I don't recommend that you try eating it. And so it turns out that this particular tunicate, this orangey one, it has a fun name. It's called the pancake batter tunicate. And it actually is an invasive species, which is bad. We will talk more about this pancake batter tunicate in just a moment, but I wanted to introduce it to you here so you kind of have an idea of what that animal looks like. Is there anything else on this rope, Olivia? Oh my goodness, what are you pulling on? What are we looking at here? I don't know if you guys can see what's in Olivia's hand here. It looks like she's holding a string. This is actually, believe it or not, this is a worm. She just found a worm. It's not a tube worm, like a ribbon. Yeah, so this is actually, it's called a ribbon worm, and it's really long. Part of it is still hidden inside of the clump of tube worms and other things. It's got kind of a stripy appearance, although I'm not sure if you guys at home can see that. Olivia is very brave for touching this worm. I know probably some of you at home would not want to touch this thing, but don't worry, we're doing all the hard work for you. So that is a crazy find in here. You'll also notice that this clump is a lot of different colors. There's purple, there's orange, there's yellow. A lot of those colorful creatures are actually more kinds of tunicates. So we already met a few of the others. Some of them are the same, but some of them are new again. So there's actually a lot of different creatures that all they've done is found a bare rope hanging under the ocean, and they've decided to make that their home over the years. Maybe some of you at home can tell me, how is this possible? How did these creatures even appear on these ropes in the first place? How did they get here? So that's your next question. How do these animals get here? I have the answer, plankton, from Dylan. You are correct, Dylan. At one point in their lives, a lot of these animals, the tube worms, the anemones, the tunicates, they were all little plankton, which are tiny little critters that float around in the ocean, and they just kind of end up wherever the ocean takes them. So let's get these back in the water, and then we'll have a look at some of the real creatures in their normal, natural environment, not up in the air where we are here. So if you watched our plankton show, one of our other episodes of BMSC Live, You may have learned about plankton, and a lot of the animals in the ocean, when they're juveniles in their larval stage, they just kind of float around out there, and that's how they get from one place to the other. They disperse on ocean currents and they end up wherever they end up. These particular ones have landed on our dock, and now they call this dock their home. There's another environment here on our docks right behind us, and Olivia's going to get this set up for you. She's going to pull out the underwater camera here. And we're actually able to examine some of the intertidal life on our docks as well. Let me switch this around for you. So in the intertidal zone, this is the area where the water goes up and down a couple of times throughout the day with the tides. And the tide changes, it takes about 6 hours from the time that it's high tide to low tide. And Olivia's got her camera in the water, so let's actually switch to what she's looking at here. Yeah, you guys can see this now. What are these? What are these animals that we're seeing on this piling here? The piling is it's just like a vertical piece of wood that is actually part of the anchoring system for our dock. It helps to hold our dock in place. What are these things? Aha, Rain says mussels and filter feeders. And one of the types of filter feeders that we're finding here are barnacles. Oh, and then just a little bit lower, Olivia, and to the side. We miss you too, Rain. There are some interesting creatures on our piling here. We are seeing some sea stars, just a little bit to the side, Olivia. There, oh, other side. Yeah, you got it. Oh, and in the background, there's a beautiful image of some fish swimming around behind here. This is great. So we're looking at two different sea stars. Remember, we saw that purple ochre star first. The bottom one is the purple one, and the top one is the orange one. These are the same species of ochre stars. In the background, the fish that you're seeing are pile perch. Yeah, that closest one was definitely just a pile perch right there. And they're very common when you stand on any dock, actually, not just the BMSC dock. If you look over the side and you see some fish, they're probably some kind of perch there. Now, these particular perch, they come right up to the piling itself, and they actually feed on some of the animals living here. The barnacles, for instance, they pick off little bits of shrimp and little crustaceans that happen to also be attached to the pilings, and these perch love to snack on those kinds of foods. So back to our ochre stars for a second. We've got the orange and the purple one here. Does anybody know what the favorite food of an ochre star is? What do they like to eat? They're very close to their food source, and actually they're not super fussy. They will eat multiple things. So for instance, the barnacles in this shot, the white bits are the barnacles, and ochre stars will eat barnacles, but that's not their favorite. Olivia's panning up the piling here. As we get a little bit shallower, we might encounter their favorite food. Sherry, you've got the answer. It is mussels. So here are some mussels. They're a little bit hard to see. Yeah, Rain, you've got the answer too. And they do like to change their colors. These particular ones are black, and so they're a little hard to see. Olivia's going to pan over to some other mussels here that are still also black, but they can change their color depending. And so these mussels are the favorite food of the ochre stars. They are bivalves, which means they have two shells. They're mollusks, which means they're related to snails and other shellfish. Other bivalves include things like scallops and oysters and clams. So they're all kind of cousins. But this is the favorite food of the sea stars. And the sea stars, the ochre stars, have not found this particular clump of mussels yet because they're on a separate little piece of our anchor chain that's secured here. The ochre stars haven't quite found a way to venture over this way. It's kind of interesting that when we're looking at the intertidal zone, actually, Phil, can you look at my camera again for a second? Here we go. So as the tide goes up and down on these pilings, sometimes the animals growing here are exposed to air, and other times they're underwater. And it's this great fight for survival. With the ochre stars, they try to come up to the surface as much as possible to eat the mussels when the tide is high, but then if they're too slow and they don't get back down into the deeper water before the tide comes up, then they're probably not going to survive. Mussels are a little bit better at surviving out of the water than the ochre stars are. They can all survive for a little bit of time, but mussels can survive longer than the ochre stars. Let's take a look at some of the other creatures that we might find. I've got to get out of Olivia's way here. She's going to line up the camera on a new part of the dock and we'll see what other creatures we might be able to encounter. Oh, she's going underwater. Great. So she's back in the area where we first started pulling up those lines at the beginning. And now we can see what they look like in a more natural environment under the water. So what you're looking at in this picture, there's a black circle here, and that's actually the lid of a bucket. It was something that we attached to the rope when we put it underwater in order for to create more surface area, basically for the animals to colonize on. So all those little plankton that were drifting around out there now had more of a habitat to settle on and begin to grow on. So there's lots of life even after just a year or a couple of years of this bucket lid being underwater. It's now home to lots of things. All right, what are we looking at? Does anybody know what those fluffy things are? Olivia's kind of exploring around underneath the dock here. What are those fluffy things? Yes, you got it, Rain. These are the anemones. And in fact, these are the same species of anemones that we were looking at initially when we were up on the dock and we had those weird brown blobs that we poked. One of the first animals we saw, those were the same kind of anemones. They're called plumose anemones. They have very fine, feathery tentacles, and those are used to capture their food. Does anyone want to take a guess what their food might be? What could those tentacles, those feathery tentacles, be used for capturing? What do you think it might be? Let me know in the comments. We'll come back to that in just a second. This is a great view of some of those plumose anemones. The other thing that's growing on this bucket, this is a new kind of tunicates. This is great. Just back off a little bit, Olivia. Yeah. This is also a little bit challenging for Olivia because as the tide goes out, the lids of the bucket are spinning with the current of the water, so it's very challenging to actually get them in focus as the water sort of does as it pleases. But what we're looking at, besides that anemone, the smaller white spots, those are another kind of tunicate, but they don't look quite as blobby as the ones that we saw up on the dock here. These ones are called light bulb tunicates, and when the light hits them just right, they look almost as though they have the filament of a light bulb inside them, and they kind of appear to be glowing. These ones were a little bit too low now, Olivia. You can just bring yeah, there we go. The camera's back in the right spot. Maybe you can kind of see them glowing there. I don't know. My screen also is a little bit in the sunlight right now, so you can probably see this better than I can. This is great. So we've got these light bulb tunicates. And again, just like the weird blobby tunicates, and in fact, there is a blobby tunicate on the screen right now, um, they all begin their life as plankton. They settle here on the dock, but at least with these light bulb ones, we can see there are distinct individuals, whereas in the blob, it's a whole bunch of individuals and they're all just one big colony together. It's really hard to tell which one is which. There are also there's some feathery bits coming off of that bucket lid there. They are a type of animals called hydroids. We'll see a better picture of those in just a moment, I think. We also have some tube worms on this bucket lid. Yes. And now that they're back in the water, the worms rather have extended from the tubes. Yeah, Claire, you say they look like pom-poms. That's a good description for them. They really do look like pom-poms. Let's take a look at some more of them in just a moment. We're going to switch to a new line so that you guys can see what else is down there. And on this next line, we're going to find some more of that invasive sea squirt or tunicate that we looked at earlier up on the dock. So I want to talk about those for a little bit. Oh, actually, we're in an before I get to the invasive tunicate, we're at the spot where there are lots of tube worms or pom poms, as Claire calls them. And now that you can see they're underwater, the worms have extended from their tubes, and all those beautiful feathery bits are their feeding tentacles. And they eat the exact same thing that those plumose anemones are feeding on. I'm not sure if anyone answered that question, but the answer is plankton. So both the plumose anemones and the tube worms, they just capture whatever little plankton happens to be floating around under the water there. So this is a great shot of all those tubes. Olivia, what happens if you bump one? Did you see that? They retract inside their tubes, and the reaction is much more obvious when they're underwater and their feathers are extended. So these are in fact called feather duster tube worms. And this is a great example of their predator escape response. Let me know if you can think of an animal that might like to eat the feather duster worm. Certainly not me, but actually I don't know if humans eat feather duster worms. They're not poisonous as near as I know, but they're not particularly appetizing either. So um, yeah, let me know if you can think of what the actual predator of the feather duster worm might be. Right. All right. So back to those invasive tunicates for a second. There, Olivia's got the shot right now. That is perfect. This is that weird macaroni and cheese looking creature. Look, you can just see it dangling there, hanging about in the water. And it literally just grows over the surface of everything in its path. It's like a carpet that just covers up all the animals there. And this is a real problem because it's taking over all of the species that would normally be found living under our dock. This one has been introduced here, and now it just kind of is in charge of all the other animals. It may actually kill the other animals. So we've left it here for you today just so that you can see it. But after this show, we're going to be removing this animal from the water in hopes that we can prevent the spread of this invasive species. We are I'm wondering if you know the answer to how an invasive species might be spread here. How did it get here in the first place? Let me know the answer to that. I just saw a comment pop up that mentioned that fish might be the predators of the feather duster tube worms, and that is true. There are different kinds of fish that would come and try to attack the tube worms. So if the tube worm isn't fast enough and retracts into its tube quickly, it might get eaten by a fish. That's great. Phil, are there any other comments on YouTube right now?
No, it's a quiet crowd over there. But
All
yeah, they're
right.
definitely enjoying the show.
Excellent. We have a little bit more to show you. Did anybody come up with the answer to how invasive species get here? Hmm. Thanks, Stacy. Yes, you're right. Bilge water is a great example. So what that means is that often ships, large ships at least, they take on water from whatever port they're in. When they're not carrying any kind of cargo, they need to weigh themselves down so that they ride more smoothly in the water out on the open ocean. But then whenever they get to where they're going and they start to take on cargo and load up, they will just release whatever water they're carrying and also whatever little larvae and organisms happen to be living in that water at the same time, all the little plankton basically. So sometimes when that happens, the larvae in that bilge water take over in the new environment, and that's probably what happened with these tunicates here. Or else maybe the adult tunicates were just growing right on the hull of a boat somewhere, and the boat moved from one place to another and introduced the tunicates that way. But as you can see from the way that they're growing over the surface of everything, they really are a problem. What you're seeing in the shot right now, all that feathery looking stuff, it looks like seaweed actually. In fact, it's not. That's another kind of animal. Believe it or not, I know it doesn't look like an animal, but it's actually called a hydroid. And again, it's a colony of animals. So very much like some of those sea squirts, the tunicates, they are a group of animals. These ones are actually related to anemones. They're kind of like cousins of the anemones. They don't really sting, or at least they don't sting humans. So we're safe if we do brush against them when we're swimming, but it probably feels gross if you touch them. But an animal, not a plant. So I don't know if anybody predicted that we might see something called a hydroid. Maybe you didn't even know that a hydroid existed today. There's one more thing that I want to show you before we go for the day. We'll just take a moment to look at the animals that are living on the actual dock itself. So Olivia's going to reposition the camera here because it turns out that basically any available space underwater becomes habitat for something. So here we've built our dock to in order to access our boats and get out onto the ocean, but it turns out that many different species have decided to call this home. So let's go back to Olivia's camera for a second. And what you're seeing is the underside of our dock. We like to check on this periodically and make sure that it's all working. What we see here are these plumose anemones again. So all the fluffy things, the white and the brown, are the plumose anemones with their fluffy tentacles that eat plankton. There's big ones and small ones. They're all over the place under here. That seems to be the most common species on the underside of our dock. And there's a great shot of the whole bottom of our dock right there. Perfect. So as you can see, there's very few spaces that are available now for any other creatures to colonize. It's all been taken up by the anemones. There's a fish in the picture there. I can't see from my screen what type of fish. I think that's a shiner perch, but I'm not 100% sure. Maybe Phil, you can help me out with that ID a little bit.
Yeah, from what I can see, it looks like a shiner perch as well.
Cool. So there's a couple of different species of perch. We saw the pile perch earlier. This one's a shiner perch. They all like to live in and around our docks. So this is a great time for us to ask any last minute questions before we say goodbye for the day. So does anybody have any questions for me before we go? Anything on YouTube, Phil?
No, nothing new. Nothing new. Still have a bunch of people watching, but last chance for some questions. Anyone?
Thank you, Karen. Karen really likes your photography, Olivia. Olivia also says that there's some fish that she can see. Actually, maybe you can see them from my camera here. If we switch to my camera, Phil. Oh, they're just disappearing under the water. Sorry, we missed them for you guys. That there are a lot of fish in our area around our docks, and it's a great spot to just come down and experience all the different types of wildlife here. Once in a while, we even see seals or sea lions from our docks, but not today. So you're not quite in luck. You'll have to tune in another time if you want to see that. Which reminds me, we'll be doing another one of these live shows every week for the rest of June. So tune in next time. We'll be broadcasting live from a beach at low tide. Oh, there is a question coming in. Does Bamfield have any, or I didn't quite see the whole thing. Phil, can you help me out with that question?
Yeah. Rain is asking, does Bamfield have any summer job opportunities for high school graduates who are passionate about marine science and biology? I visited Bamfield in 8th grade and I love the West Coast. I'm an aspiring marine biologist / conservationist.
Awesome. You came on a field trip in 8th grade. That's what I love to hear. So normally in normal conditions, we would have opportunities available for more people to come to Bamfield. Unfortunately, this summer we don't. Most of our center is shut down at the moment. We're fortunate enough that we can still run these education programs, but basically everything else is closed this summer. So check back next year and hopefully we'll have better news for you then. Yeah. Oh, that school still comes to visit here. That's awesome. Thank you so much. All right, I would love to say thank you to the rest of my team here. Let's have one last look at Olivia here. There she is. Thanks, Olivia, for your camera work. Thanks to Phil on the boat here. There he is. And I'd like to leave you with Just a reminder to tune in next week. And also, if you like what you see here, please consider making a donation to BMSC. There's a link to our website in the video notes here, and it's really easy to just follow the prompts to make a donation. Thank you so much for tuning in today. We will see you next week.